Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Subcontinent. As you know, our program aims to address the most significant issues in the South Asian region that affect the governments, communities, organizations and the region as a whole. And as always, we try to explore and explain its geopolitics, untangle the arguments from different perspectives and make the alternative voices heard. So, stay tuned.
In this edition of the Subcontinent, we are going to take a look at the vast potential for trade and investments between Iran and Pakistan and roadblocks created by US sanctions. And we shall discuss the multiple trade agreements inked by the two neighbouring countries and efforts being made to remove bottlenecks.
There is a massive potential for bilateral trade and commerce between the two regional allies, Iran and Pakistan, which hasn't been fully tapped. Trade ties between Tehran and Islamabad have been affected by several factors, the most important of which is the draconian US sanction in recent years. The two countries, however, continue to make strenuous efforts to remove bottlenecks in their bilateral trade relations and increase the volume of annual trade from around $1 billion to $5 billion by 2023. And the efforts in this direction have lately gained momentum.
Pakistan, with its large consumer market, holds immense potential for trade with regional countries, particularly Iran. The two countries, in an attempt to remove obstacles in the path of bilateral trade and investments, have stepped up efforts to tap the vast potential that exists between them. The efforts have gained momentum under the new government in Tehran that is vigorously pursuing the East-centric foreign policy, with focus on neighbouring countries. On September 6th to 7th, during the 9th Joint Trade Committee meeting between Iran and Pakistan in Tehran, the two sides agreed to revive the stalled talks on the free trade agreement and raise the volume of annual trade from less than $1 billion to $5 billion by 2023. It is in line with the goal of pushing the annual bilateral trade to $10 billion, which economic pundits see a real possibility provided the necessary infrastructure is in place.
I am very happy and I sincerely congratulate both the countries on achieving this big milestone that Mr. Razak Daud is already in Tehran and his counterparts, along with his counterparts of Iran, they are working on this. I've heard they've almost signed the contract. I think this will be a major step in bringing both the countries together and we can enhance trade of Iran and Pakistan, because that was the basic thing along with the sanctions. We were not able to transfer money through our central banks. So once there is a barter agreement between both the countries, I think it will facilitate the business community on both sides of the border.
If this barter trade agreement goes ahead, I'm very happy for that, and I'm pretty sure that these barter agreements will enhance the trade between Pakistan and Iran for at least $5 billion US, considering the industrial base of Pakistan and the industrial base of Iran, and what we can import from there and what we can export from Pakistan and vice versa. I'm very happy about that. I'm looking forward to it, and I feel that considering what has happened right now and the planning that we already have in place for inviting the Iranian exhibitors to Pakistan, I think the timing of both the events goes very well for the event, and I'm hopeful that the Iranians will participate in majority in February in Lahore for the exhibition, which is going to happen on the 16th of February 2022.
The two long-time allies have agreed to make renewed efforts to remove the bottlenecks and facilitate the progress and promotion of trade and commerce, with focus on two-way investments, better connectivity, barter trade, reduction in tariffs, construction of border markets, and joint exhibitions. It augurs well not only for Iran-Pakistan relations, but for the region as well.
Pakistan has a huge textile industry, and when you see Pakistan exports to the world, more than 70% of exports are in textiles, different sort of textiles, cotton yarn, knitwear, bedwear, So and from the Iran side, if we see the strength of Iran, it's basically oil and gas. And yes, so these two are potential economic areas, I would say. But when we talk about private sector, of course, it is the private sector which basically drives the trade. Wherever trade is happening in the world, it's between the private sectors, between the companies. So government and the public sector is only the facilitator. So I would say that yes, there has to be strong linkages between the private sector, between both countries. And once those linkages are well established, I think private sector be in a better position to push the government sector or the public sector to improve the security and political relations.
Although both Iran and Pakistan have granted most favored nation status to each other, trade between them has seen erratic fluctuations over the years. The volume of annual trade between the two countries has been nowhere close to the potential that exists between them. The preferential trade agreement Tehran and Islamabad inked in 2014 has evidently had no consequential impact on the volume of bilateral trade in recent years. The target of a $5 billion annual trade by 2021 has faced a major impediment: the US sanctions.
At a 2016 business summit in Islamabad, then Pakistani Premier Nawaz Sharif, flanked by then Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, said the two countries aim to increase the annual trade volume to $5 billion by 2021. That time, total trade volume between them was $359 million. Easing of sanctions by the US following the nuclear deal in 2015 had inspired hopes that trade could see a surge, but that was not to be. Before the nuclear deal in 2015, business prospects between the two countries either looked too bleak or too bright, depending on the US pressure. Sanctions relief in July 2015 showed slight improvement in figures, but the relief turned out to be short-lived as sanctions were reinstated in May 2018. The current volume of trade between Iran and Pakistan is well below the $1 billion mark, but the race to the $5 billion mark has started afresh.
I believe that there is a huge amount of potential that can be achieved through bilateral trade, through cultural integration, through sending the university students to each other on exchange programs. So I believe these are the options that we should tap into in order to boost up the economies for both of the countries.
Iran and Pakistan's talks on the free trade agreement is good news for both sides. It will not only open new avenues of economic cooperation between the two countries, but also paves the way for implementation of other important accords like the preferential trade agreement. The two countries have inked multiple accords over the years to bolster trade and investments, but somehow the full potential of bilateral cooperation could not be harvested. So the question is it time for a turnaround?
Iran and Pakistan had finalized the draft of the free trade agreement in late 2017 after several rounds of talks. The agreement, however, became one of the first casualties of former US President Donald Trump's megalomania. Trump's unilateral decision of pulling US out of the 2015 nuclear deal, followed by a reinstatement of crippling sanctions in May 2018, effectively put the crucial trade agreement on the back burner. It took more than 3 years for Iran and Pakistan to revive talks on the agreement, which is likely to be set into motion within 3 months. Free trade agreement will also infuse new life into the preferential trade agreement signed between the two sides in 2004, which has failed to push the volume of trade beyond $1 billion despite reducing custom duties on many tradable commodities. The reason being US sanctions and banking restrictions. While Iran and Pakistan were already members of the Economic Cooperation Organization, founded in 1985, now they are also part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. With China being a common ally, there is a possibility of Iran participating in the China-Pakistan economic corridor as well, which will provide a more convenient route to export Iran's massive resources of oil and gas. More importantly, it will puncture the US hegemonic policies.
Iran is a very important player in the region, and it's a neighbor of Pakistan. And most importantly, Iran is the neighbor of Pakistan with Balochistan, so where most of the a major chunk of CPAC is happening there. And Gwadar port is located in Balochistan. So again, I would say that Iran can play a very important role, especially in terms of developing railroad and road linkages.
Now, to have more insight, we have an interview with Mr. Abdul Razak Dawood, the Senior Advisor to Prime Minister of Pakistan in Commerce and Investment. Mr. Dawood was on a visit to Iran for the 9th session of the Iran-Pakistan Joint Trade Committee, which was held on the 6th and 7th of November in Tehran. Dr. Dawood, first of all, welcome to Iran, and I hope you had a great time up to now. As you know, we've talked before, our program is called The Subcontinent. This week's edition will be about the outlook of trade and investment development between Iran and Pakistan. So let's start by asking about Pakistan's view on the scope and prospects of investment and trade with Iran.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your program. It's a pleasure to be in Iran. You talked about trade and investments. My view is that the level of our cultural heritage, the level of our relationship as neighboring countries, as brothers, I am not too satisfied with the level of trade that we have and also investment. And one of the main reasons, obviously, are the sanctions that are placed, which has put in a big impediment. However, having said that, when we've come here on this trip, we are looking at ways and means of increasing trade. And obviously one method is through barter trade. And we have come to a certain level of understanding. And we've all agreed that within the next 1 month we should put all the pieces of the jigsaw so we can start barter trade.
So what are the main obstacles in expanding trade between Iran and Pakistan?
First of all, the sanction was one. The other thing is, I had a feeling that when I look back in the past, the amount of attention put to greater trade between the two countries has not, the desire and the attention from the government of the two countries has not been there. Now I see a big change. And I'm not saying the fault is of the Iranian government. It's equally the fault of both governments. That's the way I feel. Ever since our Prime Minister came here, I have noticed that the relationship is getting much, much better. A few weeks ago, your parliamentary delegation came to Islamabad, and I had a very good meeting with them, and they met all the people in Islamabad. And then this time when I'm here, I do feel that there is a change. There's certainly change on our side, that I can assure you. And what I've seen on this trip, that there is a change on the Iranian side, and I hope that as a result of this, we will now see greater trade.
Now you've talked about the problems that we have. What are the solutions? What solutions do you propose on removing these obstacles?
There are many impediments. For example, in our fruits and our agricultural produce that come here, we have caused difficulties to Iran. For example, in the export of their apples to Pakistan, Iran has caused difficulties to us in export of our quinoas and our mangoes. So we had a very frank discussions at why are we doing this? And so we are now agreeing to remove these type of what they basically called is non-tariff barriers. So once those are removed, and we get into free movement of goods, so that is the importance that we're now seeing.
Thank you. Now, I was going to talk about the 24-hour border operation as well. It's another important issue. Now, what are the plans in this area, and could we see that happening anytime soon?
We have increased the number of working hours. Not good enough. We are going to move to have this 24 hours. I mean, how can a country shut its borders for trade for 8 and 10 hours a day? Not acceptable. So we will do something about it. And it means training more people, having improving the organization. But I assure you it will be done.
Thank you. Now, what role do you think the cross-border markets can play in increasing trade cooperation between the two countries?
Okay. Now, you call it cross-border markets, we call it border markets. Border markets is not an element that becomes part of a greater vision of moving trucks and increasing trade between the two countries. Border market is an instrument specifically for the local people who are living in the border areas. And our Prime Minister has been particularly concerned that why do not the people living in the border areas have access to daily requirements of goods. So the market is for that. People of Iran in the Balochistan side of Iranian side of Balochistan and in Pakistan side, we have already started the construction, and I was happy that Iran yesterday agreed that they will start construction soon. So it's a very localized thing and good for the people of that area.
Hope it happens soon.
I hope so.
Now, I also want to talk about the barriers in financial exchange. It could also impact on the volume and scope of trade. So what solutions are considered to removing these kinds of barriers and facilitating trade and investment between these two countries?
In this area, simply because of the sanctions, we are finding it hard to get our our banks to join us in the facilitation of trade with Iran. So we're now trying to find other ways of doing this. What was it? And that is that we have come and discussed that what products does Iran want regularly and what products do we want regularly. So we've decided to that we would export rice to Iran, and we would import LPG from Iran. We have a big shortage of that. So we're going to start it on an experimental basis. And I think in the next couple of months, it should be operational. And let's see how far and how successful we can be in this. While we're doing this, we will look at other instruments and other what we can do. We have to find a solution. We must trade with Iran more and more, and regional trade is the answer for the betterment of the citizens of the two countries.
Now, Dr. Dawood, to wrap this up, I wanted you to summarize your visit to Iran, this visit to Iran, and the achievements that you've had up to now.
I would classify it as a remarkable visit. Remarkable because I see a change in the Iranian government. I've met your ministers of trade, agriculture, road and transport, and I've met officials of the petroleum ministry, and there is a distinct change. And I know that there is a change in Pakistan too. So that was one thing that is good. As soon as we talked about all the issues, it did not take long for both sides, to put whatever their grievances were. I said, let's put the grievances looking at each other as brothers, put our grievances down, and have a frank discussion. And it didn't take long that we started to change and made a very short list that this has to be changed. So that was the second point on which I feel good. Third was I went and saw your car manufacturing facility. And what I saw today was very, very pleasing. A remarkable achievement by the Iranian people, a very good facility, and it shows the strength of your engineering. It showed the strength of your manufacturing. And I would like to very much have collaboration between Pakistani manufacturers and Iran. You see, we talked of trade and investment. Bulk of our discussions was on trade. On investment, which is falling behind, we've got to be able to have greater investment between the two countries. From what I saw today, and if that is the level of your engineering, then you must have a certain standard in your chemicals, and your plastic industry, and your food processing industry. Your government mentioned that they would like to come into Pakistan and invest in auto industry, home appliances, and dairy. I said, you're most welcome. We would love to have Iranian investment, and I will certainly facilitate their investment in these three sectors.
Dr. Dawood, thank you for your time. I hope your visit to Iran was fruitful, and I wish you all the best.
It's been a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to coming again.
And that was our episode on Iran and Pakistan moving towards bolstering their bilateral trade ties, which have for years been affected by US sanctions. Now, to watch the best bits and pieces of our show and more Subcontinental updates, follow us on social media platforms, and don't forget to give us your feedback. We shall meet again, same time, same day, next week. So till then, take care.